Welcome to Epistemology Online, where the idea is to get people to articulate what they believe to be true and false, good and evil, and their rationale behind it. Hopefully a different way of discourse online.
Asking questions this time, or am I still asking questions?
What do you prefer? I'm easy.
I'm cool either way. I mean,
well, we did two, me asking you questions. I like the cross-examination. It makes me think, like, on my feet, and I'm sitting down, but it makes me think, like, how would I articulate it? Because, I'll go ahead and hit record. So
yeah.
in the third video, whenever we're talking about legalization, you asked a question of like, well, would you remove all regulations? And I think if I just said yes, that would be perceived as like, what kind of madman would suggest this? But
yeah.
If I'm able to articulate why I think yes before answering, I think there's a lot more like, oh, yeah, he's not necessarily against regulations, just regulations that are backed by force, which currently I would posit that most, if not all, are.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Regulations? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
The same thing. But
regulations. Got it. 15 minutes on the clock. We have begun, Amanda.
Yeah. So we were talking about legalization in the past video, and that automatically leads us to talk about different regulations that the government might impose on certain things. So bare minimum, should there be regulations on anything?
That's the question. Should there be regulations on anything?
Really broad. Yeah.
I would ask you first to clarify the question. What do you define as a regulation?
So we'll limit it to government imposed regulations. So either laws or policies or things that you might get fined for, or you might even get criminally charged for breaking said regulation.
Okay. And let's pick us. And you said, would I? What was the specific question? So I agree with the definition of regulation that you've put forward so far. I may add more to it, but I agree with what you said. What was the question?
So we were talking about like health and safety last time. So as far as like, should my steak at a restaurant be required to be a certain temperature? That would be a regulation from the health or the food and health or whatever that one's called. I don't know the specific name of that.
There's a group of people that want to regulate.
Yeah.
Health
that your
and safety,
food
sure.
should be a certain temperature to be safe to eat. And if they don't do that, then I could get food poisoning. I could sue them. They could have fines. What about those kinds of regulations that are in the interest of people's health and safety?
Right. I totally agree that it is better to cook your meat past a certain point to where you're likely to kill bacteria. But so here's the but. I don't think it can be regulated if that regulation comes with a threat behind it. Because fundamentally, like something, so I think you and I are responsible individuals, and we're responsible enough for ourselves to go, I'm not going to eat that. It looks green. It should be red. What is this? I think the reasoning behind that is because if I remove all the obfuscating layers, if I remove all of the layers between me as a private person to the legislator that makes a law saying, even if I agree with the intent of the law that you must cook meat above a certain temperature before serving it, and go over to like a cop, or I don't think a cop would really enforce this, but like a health and safety, probably a county health and safety inspector coming in and like doing a random thermometer check and like, you're about to serve this, I've caught you. I don't know if that's ever happened, but if it did, I don't think I would feel morally justified, and I don't think I could objectively be proven to be so for me to go and do that. And because I can't personally do that, I don't think I could give that right, that action to another person and have them do it and it be morally okay.
Gotcha. So that would be like a health thing. So what about like safety? So we have traffic laws and traffic things. We're required to wear a seatbelt. Is that something like we can be either fined or even if you make it worse, like criminally charged for that, is that something that should be regulated by the government?
I would say not. To elaborate further, because I think the elaboration is probably the more important component than the conclusion. I think that the way to get to the answer is more important. If the idea is this is for your safety, where do most instances of, say, police violence occur? During a traffic stop. For your betterment, for your safety. Let's say for a moment that I decided to drive. I have a car out in the driveway right now. Let's say I hopped in it and drove to my friend's house. He doesn't live very far, 5 minutes away. And I didn't have my seatbelt on the entire time. If somebody driving a police cruiser saw me and they decided to, and they noticed and they decided to pursue that, they would turn on these red and blue lights and they would follow me. And if I didn't pull over, they would continue to follow me, and maybe they like blare a louder horn or something like that. But eventually they'd call in their friends and they would like literally smash my car in some way, shape, or form, break the tires, a pit maneuver where they hit the back and cause you to spin out. In order to protect my safety, they are willing to escalate force until I am dead. That seems like a contradiction in terms to me. As such, I cannot support anything that would be backed by that. So maybe there's an example of a regulation that isn't backed by that, or even a conceptual one.
Well, a relevant one right now that I hear a lot of debate about is the mask mandates that different cities, counties, states have been regulating. A lot of people are calling it unconstitutional to require people to wear a mask. And we've seen tons of videos of people, throwing tantrums in supermarkets because they don't want to wear a mask. So is that something that, first of all, should the government be able to regulate that? And then a secondary question would be, can a private property, a store, regulate people wearing a mask?
Should the government be able to regulate, say, like what I do in my store? Like, let's say I had my store, I would say no. Should I be able to regulate what people wear in my store, like by saying, if you're not wearing the proper dress, you can't come into my fancy dinner restaurant? Yeah, I think people are totally within their rights to say, you can only wear this if you're coming inside. I mean, you could you could flip it the other way. I think people could also say, if you want to come inside of my business and purchase something, you cannot wear this. You cannot wear a mask because it's so offensive to me. I think people can morally do that with their own property. That's the key. I think the kicker comes in whenever it comes to public land. Have you heard of the tragedy of the commons?
I don't think so.
So the tragedy of commons, the way I've heard it, goes something like this. There's a group of property owners living in kind of like a donut shape, like I got a little house and a ranch and another house and a ranch. And there's like this middle part that nobody owns. And let's say we're all, some kind of livestock grower, and we're all incentivized to graze, kind of on that common land, perhaps maybe a little too much, maybe to where the land won't grow back, because really no one owns it and no one would be benefiting if it maximized yield for generations to come, compared to, say, like my own farm, where if I intend to pass it down, I would be incentivized for taking care of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that public lands are like the epitome of the tragedy of the commons, where it's like, because no individual or no known person owns that thing, it's kind of a free-for-all where it's just like, well, I say this. Well, I say this. Well, there's a rule that says this, and there's a rule that says that this rule cannot happen, and that would be unconstitutional. So who wins? I would say nobody. Which really, like, how did we get public lands? Like, I don't know of like valid property transfers. Like, there was like the idea of, hey, everybody, we're going to form a government and we're going to build some roads and we're going to own those roads. And if you don't pay for those roads, well, we're going to take the money out of your check before you ever get it. So you don't really get a say in this. So it's like nobody legitimately owns the thing that is public land. So it really, I would treat it like unowned land that cannot ever become owned in the current paradigm of things, which is a tragedy. Like, it's a real shame, because then all of this debate would just disappear, because it's like, hey, I own this road. You have to wear a mask or you need to get off my property. Or I own this road. You can't wear a mask or get off my property.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. So I think where it's, a little bit different is, that's what he's basically doing, is as far as masks, because again, people are going to be talking about this for a while. It's going to be relevant for a while.
Yeah.
How my ability to wear a mask can affect those around me and vice versa. Like, it is a health, like, I don't know, not disaster. That's not the word I'm looking for, but it's a health issue.
Yeah, it's a risk.
To where your action might in turn make me sick. So whenever, to go back to your definition of like, if things that aren't going to hurt other people should not be regulated, as far as this disease is concerned, you can argue the science if you want to, but for the most part, science says that you could get me sick and I could get sick and die. So in that case, should regulations be more important? And then in that case, does the government have more responsibility?
Twofold. So that was a twofold question. So the first one, like, if somebody, so I think if I waved a magic wand and everything was private land and we could clearly dictate, or not dictate, but clearly know, like, this person owns this piece of land, that risk factor kind of becomes a null problem. Because, for example, it's risky to go out and eat if you're not positive that the food has been cooked above a certain temperature, to do a callback to earlier. You could theoretically choose to eat fugu fish, but it could also kill you. Depending on how the chef prepares it. They may, screw up and you get a little venom, or not venom, poison, the ingestible kind, and not live.
Yeah.
So I think life is risky in a matter of mitigating risks. If you're on your own property, or if you're abiding by the rules of the property owner that you're on, it seems like that kind of answers itself based on your consent or disconsent to be in a given area. Would you agree with that, firstly?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Privatize everything. Amanda, you've said it now. Okay.
I don't know about that.
We'll get there one day. It'll be great fun. And then the second one, so does the government have an increased mandate? Yes, if the government is not initiating force on peaceful people, which my contention and argument would be that every way that the government is funded. Actually, that's not true. I have found one program that is voluntarily funded. It's a public arts program. It's in the city that I live in, where you can voluntarily donate and they'll paint things different colors. So that's cool. Totally no problem there. Except, who paid for that land? Is that in fact validly, or was that like coerced land? So that's kind of a sticky wicket there, I guess. So maybe there is no voluntarily funded thing. So my contention would be that because the government is not respecting other people's property rights, because the government, as a group of individuals who act in concert together, each individual is violating another person's consent. And because of that, no valid property title transfer occurs. And because of that, they have no valid mandate over anybody's health, safety, or concern.
Gotcha. So to put this back to the... Sorry, Hogarth just hit something. To put this back to the driving laws. So should someone who drinks over the limit be allowed to drive home? Because now, again, just kind of like with spreading coronavirus, by driving, they're endangering other people. Much higher, or maybe not much higher stakes, but maybe higher risk. Should drunk drivers have regulations, and should they be forced to abide by those?
Who owns the roads?
Yeah.
Like, I would posit if we had a clear road owner, they could set as much restriction or lack thereof of that. As far as in the current paradigm, I think if you get the non-consent out of the ownership of, or the forcible non-ownership of things, a lot of problems can solve themselves. Because I think a lot of people are motivated to try and solve these problems. They're literally not allowed to.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so a problem is drunk driving, particularly because somebody's reaction time is slowed, which could be caused by a number of things, but drinking is one that a lot of people do, right? their reaction time is slowed, and maybe their depth perception isn't as great as it ought to be, and as a result, they wrap around a tree or another driver. That's a big problem. And what would I want? Well, if I'm driving on a road that is specifically owned by an individual, and it like somehow there's a way of verifying that everybody on this road doesn't drink and drive, I don't know what that technology would even look like. But it would probably save a lot of people's lives, because something like the third or like one of the top leading causes of early death in the U.S. is traffic accidents. And that can never be fixed so long as innovations and stuff are all forcibly kept out, because, well, we're just going to build roads. Like, yeah, road technology has come a long way as far as like the load bearing capacity. But as far as the safety is concerned, like, dude, just driving on 183, 121, they have like lines that crisscross in the middle. It's a freaking Hot Wheels demolition derby racetrack out there.
Yeah.
So I have one thought for you. Maybe kind of the last thought to throw in, and then I'll give you the last word. So if I came to you in the 1800s and said slavery should be done away with because it is a violation of people's consent of their personal property, being their body, which I think is everybody's first property and the extension thereof, some people might say, but how will the cotton be picked? Because they can't fathom how, like, the things that are being done, even through like an evil mechanism, they can't fathom that. If I had like a vision for the future and I said one day there'll be these giant metal machines that are guided by satellites in the sky that run on dinosaur fossil fuel, and that one man can do the work of 10,000, and that it'll all be transported on these big flat surfaces, they would rightly, one, deem me crazy, but I would be 100% correct.
Yeah.
And I don't think that anybody could validly like come up with a central plan of how things would be, because that would be the perfect argument for central planning, which is what government is. A group of individuals making plans for other people. Like, hey, everybody, we're going to Olive Garden because I think it's the best place, that doesn't respect anybody's consent. So I think whenever kind of the concern of like, well, how would that be done be brought up, it's like, just remember the 1800s. Like, no one predicted combine harvesters being driven by fossil fuels. Zero people. But yet, we live on it today. So anyway, that's kind of the time. But I want to give you the last word, or whatever you'd like. So the floor is yours.
No, I mean, I do like how we started with food and safety and somehow got to dinosaur fossil fuels. So I like however that train of thought worked. But yeah, I think it's interesting. And I think a lot of regulations wouldn't be necessary if people were just responsible. But I guess we just can't expect everyone to be responsible, which could be a whole different discussion about, is man good? But that's a whole, you could take whole classes on that. So we won't do that.
I would do that because I think we have an epistemological difference there. And I think that could be really fun to chat about.
Yeah. We'll have to do it another time.
Excellent. Cool. Well, see you next time, everybody. Farewell. My hope is that people can start listening to what other people are saying and try to understand like how they're thinking. That's kind of my goal.